All right, my friends, we are going to finish up the Natural Earth's History lecture notes today, and we are going to start with dating methods. And this is not dating your boyfriend or girlfriend. This is how we figure out how old organisms or fossils are. So you see the definition of fossils, any evidence of an organism that lived long ago. Relative dating uses the Earth's layers to figure out how old an organism is. It cannot tell you exactly how old, but it can tell you, hey, it's younger than this organism or it's older than this organism. Radiometric dating then uses usually carbon this could also be called carbon dating, to figure out the exact age, like, hey, this is 4 million years old or something like that. So here's how this guy works. So this is the top of the Earth. So this is what you would walk on right here. As you move farther and farther down, you've had more and more layers of whatever being put on top. So this guy down here, this is a trilobite, is a lot older than this guy up here, which I'm not sure what this is. So the farther down you go, the older an organism is compared to the other ones on top. Now what we're going to do is take a trip through geologic time, and we're going to compare it to one calendar year. So to start with, the 1st of January, a lot of scientists that study evolutionary history and all of that say that the Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago. If you have a hot second, you should watch this video that's hanging out here. So just pause the lecture and take a look at it. And then from the 1st of January to March 20th, we're just kind of figuring things out. And on March 20th of the calendar year, we hit the Precambrian era. This is when we have the oldest evidence of life. And what we mean by that, we don't necessarily mean animals. We mean just kind of organisms and cells, so smaller things. So this kind of shows we're talking about this area right here. The next trip, if you see the blue box, takes us all the way up until mid-October, which is the end of the Precambrian era. And we now, through this period, have come across algae, sponges, jellyfish, and you see some prehistoric organisms hanging out here. And then mid-October, the Paleozoic era begins. And this is when you have an explosion of life. The right combinations of things come together, and you have life upon life upon life now. We have land plants, which land plants are important because they produce oxygen. Hopefully that's what you said. Then we also have our earliest verts, amphibians and reptiles. So again, some prehistoric animals. Again, if you could click the link and go ahead and watch that short video. We are now into December, and this is when something called the Mesozoic era begins. You have different portions of this. You have the Triassic, which is when we have our first small mammals, squirrels, rats, things like that. The Jurassic, and that should be easy for you guys to remember considering Jurassic Park, is the age of the dinosaurs. And then finally, towards the end of December, we hit the Cretaceous, which is when you have your larger mammals and flowering plants. You just see some examples. That's a pretty cool picture of the dinosaurs during the Jurassic. And then you can see the flowering plants that start to pop up during the Cretaceous. Then December 26th, the Cenozoic era begins. And this is our current era. This is what we're in right now. And December 31st, humans appear. So in the grand scheme of things, are humans pretty new or are they pretty old? Hopefully you said pretty new. The fossil record shows evidence of many extinctions. I think there's 4 or 5 that have happened through these different eras. And this kind of shows how the human skull has evolved from those prehistoric humans back on December 31st to about now. So we would start here on A, and this is our current skull down here on N. So you can see a lot of the differences. You can see how it's changed, how it's adapted. to the various eras that the humans lived in. So how did life start? Many different viewpoints. We're going to focus on the scientific viewpoints or the scientific theories. I by no means am saying any of this is absolutely the way. I'm just presenting them to you, and then you make your own choices. So the first one is something called spontaneous generation. This is when they thought, hey, the desk that you're sitting at or the couch that you're sitting on could magically show life. And if you remember anything from back in August when we talked about living organisms have to come from living organisms. There was this guy called Francesco Redi that disproved this theory. Louis Pasteur disproved the theory that microorganisms grew spontaneously from the air. So now we've had two scientists that have said, hey, spontaneous generation isn't quite the thing. The thing that is true is biogenesis. That prefix bio means life, genesis means beginning. So this says, hey, living organisms have got to come from living organisms. This right here shows Francesco Redi's, I lied to you, no it doesn't. This right here shows why people thought that living organisms came from non-living things. This is a piece of meat, and they put it in a beaker, let it hang out, then they popped that beaker open, and they were like, look at that. There are living organisms in this meat. What they really were is they were fly larvae. Right? And they were like, that's so cool. The meat produced fly larvae. We know now if you don't refrigerate meat, it doesn't create, but it's a really good breeding ground for gnats and flies and all of that. But back in the 1600s, they didn't know that. So this experiment right here helped to disprove spontaneous generation. Here are some other more modern ideas, and by modern I mean 1900s. Alexander Oparin proposed the theory that life began in the oceans, that there is just this combination of different enzymes in the ocean that said, poof, here is life in the ocean. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey said, hey, I think there are some amino acids and some organic compounds that came together, and this was all catalyzed or started by lightning. And that's what this shows. This is Miller and Urey's experiment, and they had Earth's primitive oceans. They had the organic compounds, the amino acids in here, and they started this whole thing with the spark, and the spark represents lightning. That is super important. You should highlight, underline, star, smiley face that. All right, my good friend Charles Darwin. Development of the evolutionary theory happened over a long period of time, and what we're saying evolution is a change in a species over time. Okay? And it is evolution. If you want to survive in an environment, you have to adapt and evolve. Otherwise, your species is going to die. So there's geological or earth evidence that shows that the earth is very old. Fossil evidence points to changes in life forms over time. This is evolution or adaptations. Scientists wondered where species came from, how they changed, and then my good friend Charles Darwin proposed this theory that has become accepted by a majority of scientists. So there he is, that cute guy, Charles Darwin. And this basically tells the history of him. He's the founder of modern evolutionary theory that's super important. And in 1831, he took a boat called the Beagle, and he spent 5 years on an expedition to South America and South Pacific, and one of his most important stops was the Galapagos Islands. He observed many species. He took a bajillion pages of notes, and that really was the stop that helped him super duper develop this theory. Back in England, he struggled to write this because he was influenced with population studies, survival of the fittest, and then he conducted his own experiments with artificial selection. And we do that a lot nowadays. Any sort of GMOs, any sort of dog breeds, we do that. If you want a pure line, we artificially select traits and breed for those specific traits. In 1859 is when he published his book on the origin of species. That's important for you to know. And this is when he first said, hey, here's what I think's happening. And he studied finches, he studied these guys, and he also studied the tortoises that were there on the island. And he looked at all the differences in maybe beak structure and what they ate, or maybe shell structure and where they lived. So he was there for a long time taking lots and lots of notes. All right, so natural selection can also be called survival of the fittest. Those two can be used interchangeably. And the organisms that survive are the ones best suited to their environments and then will survive to pass those traits on to their offspring. This first one is called stabilizing selection, and this favors the average individual. So if you see this hump here, this is saying, hey, these organisms in the middle, the average individual, are going to survive a lot more than these guys on this side of the hump and these guys on this side. So if you think about spiders, if a spider is too large, it can be captured or eaten because the predator can see him. If it's too small, it can't really hunt very well because it's not big enough to get to the prey. This slide is super important. The next type of natural selection is directional selection, and it favors one extreme. So in this example here, it's going to favor this side of the hump. Okay? So in real life, this could be woodpeckers with long beaks, maybe more favorable if insects live deep within their trees. Okay? You could go this way too. This one is not illustrated this way, but you could go this way where the hump shifts this way and it favors this side, depending on what sort of trait that you're talking about. So directional selection favors one extreme of the trait, maybe long or short, tall or short, something like that. So it shifts the hump one way or the other. Your last one, which is the easiest for kids to remember usually, is disruptive selection. You talk about disrupting something, you are kind of taking out a part of it. And this is going to favor both extreme forms of it. So it's going to favor this guy and it's going to favor this guy. There are no guys in the middle, okay, because the average individual cannot survive. So your example here, both white and black forms of a mollusk can hide on rocks, whereas gray color can't hide on rocks within that area, and it's super visible and get eaten by birds.